Welcome back if you're a friend of the channel, and welcome if you're brand new. It's good to have you. I'm your host, Cranky Yankee F1, otherwise known as Nick. Easier to say that. And we're going to be talking exclusively about the transfers. So we might as well kick it off with a top line summary and then kind of go straight down from there and talk about what's really next and what could come and what might come and what will be before we talk anything that happened between Vettel, Ricciardo, or Carlos Sainz. What needs to be said and what needs to be at least internalized is the 2020 season is not guaranteed. The buck doesn't stop with the FIA. They're not the ones making these decisions. The countries who are in charge, obviously, of these races and the circuits, they are the ones ultimately that make the final call. Let's say we get the all clear. Well, then we have another conversation to have, and that's about the logistics of Formula One racing. A lot of things are going to have to be adjusted. They're not going to get 15 to 18 races in 6 months, in 5 months. That's just not possible unless we alter some things. So with that out of the way, let's just talk about transfers. So we have Sebastian Vettel, of course, confirmed to be leaving Ferrari at the end of this 2020 season. And then after that, we have Carlos Sainz moving over to that Ferrari seat next to Charles Leclerc. And then after that, we have Daniel Ricciardo moving over to McLaren. Now, just at a net top line level, when I look at these transfers, because obviously these things are dominoes, of course, there's still a couple more to fall. We still have some question marks essentially over Sebastian Vettel and his career. Where's he going to go? But the net winner of all this has to be McLaren. Even if you're sitting there comparing Ricciardo to Carlos Sainz, really just look at it in terms of Ricciardo, whether you think he's quicker or not, he's got more experience. He can probably do a better job developing the car, and McLaren's in a position where they're on the up. And if you're Ricciardo at a long-term level, if McLaren's the winner, Ricciardo is someone who's, I would say that if you were to look at his Red Bull move from 2018 to where he is now, customer car to manufacturer, back to customer car, that's not a net win for him. I think this is something that when he looks back on this, it won't be considered a victory, ultimately, this final step. Now, as it looks in aggregate and where he stands in the short term, this McLaren seat may be pretty good for him. To finish off his career on a high note, I mean, look at Max Verstappen. You can be a customer team, essentially, and still win races. It's not necessarily that he can't win. It's just going to be very difficult to win championships. Of course, it's been done before. But those cars, essentially, you look back to McLaren. You think back to even Mika Häkkinen. The one thing that probably helped Ricciardo and his decision, while it's not, as negative, at least as I could be depicting this, they are going to be getting the Mercedes power in 2021. So whereas before they were on the Renault power, now they're going to be moving over to that hybrid from Mercedes. Because we haven't seen Ricciardo in that sort of car before, in that sort of power, this could be something that works out well for him. Ultimately, at the end of the day, it's still, like I said, a move that's backwards. He's still going back to a customer team, but he never really seemed that comfortable at Renault. And I think when it comes down to your confidence and where you are in the car, he has to be comfortable. And driving next to Lando, I don't think it'll be as fun in games as it was with Carlos, not because they won't get on, but I think Lando will likely change how he drives a little bit to match the intensity that he thinks. He's talked about this, but he wants to be a little bit more quote unquote serious. So I think just from that end, the dynamic will be a little bit different. But I actually think that all of the same issues that I predicted that were going to happen with Ricciardo, struggling with Ocon, the fight with Norris is not all that different. And you've got someone who's good at qualifying, which we'll get to with Carlos Sainz, but the rookie is out qualifying Carlos Sainz. Ocon is someone who was very, very good on Saturday, and that was ultimately the demise for Sergio Perez. Where Ricciardo will be especially dangerous was in 2019, he put in some very, very dangerous overcuts. He ran very long stints, 40 plus laps sometimes in those hard compounds. So between him and Norris hopefully getting a little bit better of luck, he had the second least amount of laps finished in the 2019 season, of course, next to Romain Grosjean. But I think if you sort of bake that into the cake, McLaren as a unit, this will be an incredibly strong team, and they will certainly be best of the rest. So as it stands for Ricciardo, moving over to the customer team, that's not ideal, but McLaren, it's not as if they're slouches. They are on the up. Their management team is incredibly strong. Zach Brown is doing incredible things for McLaren. So from that end, it isn't the worst move in the world. And let's say Carlos Sainz is there for 2 years, probably, at least at minimum. Let's say worst case scenario. Ricciardo's going to be stepping in when he's what? 33, but I think that now he can commit. And when you see drivers move around, it's hard, I would imagine, to get settled with the team, with your garage, with your engineers and mechanics, if you're not there long enough. And this is the same problem that I think Carlos Sainz has run into, except he's kind of leveraged his way up and traded up to different teams in different positions, which is good for his career and his stock. But ironically, I think that Ricciardo has the tools to make this work. In my opinion, he's got the racing tools, he's got the racecraft. At the end of the day, it will not be an easy fight for Ricciardo, but it will be entertaining, and it probably will be some of the best matchups we've seen in the midfield. I thought that Ricciardo versus Ocon was probably going to be the best midfield fight on the inter-team side. But now I think that's just transitioned over. It's going to be Ricciardo versus Lando. That will be the fight to watch. All right, next up, Carlos Sainz. Now, Carlos Sainz is someone that it's going to be a little bit controversial, but I think that Carlos Sainz is not the right person for this role. He is without a doubt a talented driver that you need to respect on the grid. From a management standpoint, he's someone you'd want. From a driver standpoint, he's someone you don't like seeing in your rearview mirrors. That doesn't make him the best fit for Ferrari. This isn't a zero-sum conversation though. Just because you think that Carlos Sainz may be better for the job or the role does not mean that Ricciardo wasn't, and vice versa. And I see a lot of conversation happening around this. Personally, I think that Giovinazzi was the best pick for this role. My one question is, will Carlos Sainz put the car on pole position or P2? Remember, he's got to beat Valtteri. He's got to beat Lewis. Knowing what we know about Carlos and his qualifying record last year, I'm not even going to go back because I don't even think that's totally fair. Let's just look against Lando. Best case scenario for Ferrari was they got a driver in there who could put the car in the front row and then block. He could block Hamilton. He could block Valtteri. He could block anyone else that's out qualifying. But he basically needs to give Leclerc breathing room. This is a 100% 1-2 dynamic, or it should be. It should have been chosen like that. And Carlos Sainz, we have historical evidence. Think back to 2015 with Max. And it is very important to recognize that that wasn't a harmonious situation. It wasn't perfect, and that's okay. But it's a little bit naive, in my opinion, to think that he's going to walk in and just play number 2. Just because he's a nice guy, just because he's perceived a certain way in the media. And I think Ricciardo's the same way. But every bit that Ricciardo is perceived as someone who's going to be a tough teammate, he's going to want number 1 status. How is Carlos Sainz any different? Of course he's going to want number 1 status. He's someone who's getting recruited for Ferrari. So no matter how you slice this, it's still a tough situation for Carlos Sainz. On the one hand, he can't pass this up. I will say that. Just because I'm having this conversation, just because this is the talk of everyone in Formula 1, he can't pass this opportunity up. But that doesn't make it ideal. And I think recognizing that, 2 things can be true at once. And that's where I stand. It's not perfect. Carlos Sainz is a great driver, but this is not ideal for him being paired at Ferrari. But he got the Ferrari seat. It opened up. You got to take it. But that doesn't mean that we can't have a conversation about why this isn't ideal. If he goes and he gets beat by Leclerc pretty badly, he's still a young guy. He'll land, he'll have an exit strategy. He's smart, he's got a good camp. He will get another seed. His reputation after that is going to be about the person who lost to a very good driver. Think of Barrichello, you think of Irvine. These drivers are race winners. They're not Michael Schumacher's losers, right? They played second fiddle, but they're not just people who got embarrassed by Michael. That's not how you think about them. They're all journeymen, as I call them. And Carlos Sainz seems to have that trait. Someone who will have a very long career in Formula 1. The other reason this is tough for Carlos is because he has to accept the fact that the strategy is really never going to go his way. I mean, I'm sure he will get a bone tossed to him sometimes, but if it comes down between him and Leclerc, it will not be like 2019. There will be no hesitation. It's very clear. And like I said, you look at Binotto's comments initially, even on the first day, his comments about this happening are pretty bearish in terms of where he puts Carlos Sainz in terms of the hierarchy of the drivers. You can actually see that quote right there. Now, that said, can he do what Leclerc did to Seb? Can he? In my opinion, no, but it is possible. Ferrari won't just ignore that if he's quick. So there is an opportunity, and I think that's why Ricciardo, on the tail end of his career, Ferrari isn't the best choice in a perfect world for him either. But being as though this is his final stint, I think he would have taken that, and that's probably why Ferrari didn't take him. He is a liability from a number 1 driver dynamic, that hierarchy perspective. Carlos Sainz is less so. In this case, I will say that Giovinazzi is a young Italian driver. He is someone coming out of the Ferrari Driver Academy. And where Ferrari are going to be dangerous in the next 5 years is through that academy. You look at the drivers that are sitting, lying in wait. They're talented. It's a good group of guys. And if you have a promotion from Giovinazzi, I think that this says a lot to the drivers. This is a lot about the strength of the program and the confidence in those young drivers that, yes, that Ferrari seat, the coveted seat, is an option. And you kind of just took that off the table. And I think you can go too far with it, like Red Bull. But in this situation, I don't think Giovinazzi technically would be walking out the front row left and right. And if you're saying to yourself, well, that's inconsistent, Nick, you said that Carlos Sainz won't lock out the front row. You're right. I don't think Giovinazzi would either. I think Daniel Ricciardo would lock out the front row a significant amount more. Now, because Carlos Sainz won't, in my opinion, and because Giovinazzi won't, in my opinion, you might as well take the driver who I think will play ball more. I think Giovinazzi is a better fit for that number 2 role. I think Carlos Sainz will teeter. Leclerc could handle anyone. I'm someone that's very critical of Leclerc, but I think flat out, it's no secret he's world class. He's one of the best drivers on the grid. Now, it doesn't really matter who's next to him. He'll get more of a fight in terms of fighting for strategy and making a fuss about that out of Carlos Sainz than he would Giovinazzi. And Giovinazzi is someone who is very adaptable. You look at his 2019 season, it's on the up. You can see some of his race results right here. So some of his race results are, the trend is up. After the break, he did very well next to Kimi. Before the break, not so much. Just a recap from a net standpoint between those two, this is a win for McLaren. But no matter how tough it is for Carlos Sainz, he's still at Ferrari. And that's really all that matters. And I think he'll have a long career, and I think this will only bolster it. It's just a tough situation. The seat's open, you got to take it. It's not ideal, though. I think that who shows up on the Mercedes team in terms of the Valtteri, is it going to be the 2017, 2018, or 2019? That is what changes everything. When I made my 2020 predictions, it was all based on how Valtteri was going to do. And I don't think that Valtteri was going to be able to repeat what he did in 2019, which frankly was an incredible season if you take a look back at it. But this will be an incredible season to watch. It changes all of the driver dynamics, and it's going to be great. Now, on to Sebastian Vettel. I think that he's retiring, plain and simple. If you look at the seats left, I never saw him at anything other than Renault or potentially Mercedes. Mercedes obviously being ideal, but he's retiring out of a lack of options, really. He's not going to take a step down, in my opinion. He's not someone who wants to leave his legacy, leave his career, taking a step backwards and going to a team where he just can't win. I think if he were to come back into the limelight, it probably would have to be with a team like Mercedes. There's just really no path. The only path is that Mercedes, which they were already on the fence about releasing Valtteri, and I don't think that that's something that they'll do. It would be a little awkward to see Lewis fight next to Sebastian Vettel. It would be good for Mercedes, of course. I believe in 2 number 1 drivers if you're in a top performing car, not if you're in a midfield car. If you're going to fight inter-team, it better be for wins, not for podiums. His only route really was to go to Mercedes. It won't open up, and I highly doubt that he goes to Renault. Now, we know through civil court cases how much Ricciardo's being paid. It's a fair amount. Anyone taking a pay cut is going to be a net win for Renault. Now, if they get someone like Valtteri, which is a stretch in my opinion, but someone on the table is Fernando Alonso. That's a really good role for Fernando. I think that would be better than his last time back at Renault. And this is a situation where the regulations are changing. These changes are going to be significant to the sport, and everyone is underestimating them. Racing will not be the same. And the people who are going to be on the upside of that are people who have the most power. These constructors that are OEMs, these constructors that make their own engines, they are the team that's set up to be in the best position to win. And Renault is that team. You could get a wild card like in 2005, where there's a new regulation changes and then the car is just perfect. That's not out of the ordinary. And that's not out of the realm of possibility, looking at the regulation changes and how steep they'll have to be. Ultimately, I see Seb leaving. That door at Mercedes never really was open. It never really was even a door. If it opens, I think he'll take that on a 1-year deal, but that's just, that's just pie in the sky. I don't think it'll happen. I think Valtteri is going to stay there. Why would he leave? Why would Mercedes change? And with Seb not taking that Renault seat, I think that does leave the door open for someone like Fernando Alonso. I don't know if that'll happen. I don't know what's in their cost cap, and I don't know what Alonso will take. I do think that he will accept a pay cut. I do think that Fernando's, as much as you guys think I hate him, I'm critical of him, but I think he's smart. I think he's a very good businessman. He's even better racer, and he knows what he's doing, and he's a very seasoned driver. So to have someone like that, to be interested and hear him chirping up a little bit, I don't think that that's that crazy for him to take that Renault seat, and I think he'd be in a really good position. I think that as much as Renault likes to talk, they are in a good position. They can recover. They make their own power unit. They make their own chassis. Obviously, everyone does, but they are in a position to succeed. And I think that with Fernando Alonso, that's very interesting. Next to Ocon too, remember. So that's a very dangerous team. That's a tough team to beat. They just need the car. And if Alonso does not end up taking that seat, which I think it's a toss-up, really. I think it depends on, like I said, what each of the parties want. I can see Nico Hülkenberg coming back. I don't see Hülkenberg as someone that's going to be terribly difficult to work with. He walked away. He showed that he means business, and if there's no deal to be made, he's leaving. And that shows that he's not needy. He's not desperate. He will take it if it's the right role. And I think that's a pretty good mindset to walk back into Formula One. We've seen it happen before. And I think that if he plays his cards right, it makes a lot of sense. He had a pretty decent year when they cut him. I think it was overzealous, and I think that it was more a principle thing. But all things said, his year wasn't that bad. As news comes out about Seb, which it will happen fast, he won't be in limbo very long, I will let you know here. If you're new, make sure to subscribe. I'd like to switch it up. This is kind of a new setup. I appreciate all your support, of course. If you have any feedback, I thrive off that, and I need that here. So be as critical as you like. Make sure it's constructive, and I'll keep continuing to improve this channel and the content that you get. So thanks for checking this out, and enjoy the transfer market. Hopefully it calms down a little bit, and I'll see you soon.